Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And if you are here for the first time or if you're visiting, we especially want you to feel welcome and are glad that you're here for a wonderful simcha with a terrific young woman who really exemplifies what we are about here at Temple Israel. So Rabbi Waxman, who was the rabbi of the synagogue for over half a century, also, apropos sense of humor, had a very good sense of humor. He did a lot of interfaith work, and once he was on a panel with a number of scholars representing different faiths, and one of the faiths was talking about how their particular religious community practiced ancestor worship. They used to dance just like that. So this scholar was going around talking about the ancestor worship that they do, and then turned to Rabbi Waxman and said, "Do Jews practice ancestor worship?" And he said, "Actually, we prefer to worship our children." I want to talk a little bit this morning about the concern that everybody has with their children somehow internalizing the importance of what they think is important, with their children taking on certain values and traditions, which Emily spoke about earlier, and I'd like to actually expand. And if you will just indulge me, what do you call somebody who tries really hard to ensure that Jewish traditions are passed down from one generation to another? I came up with this morning. A door-to-door salesman. All right, thanks everybody. And as you're trying to determine whether you're going to make fun of that joke or use it, or both, I'm going to proceed. When it comes to the next generation, as they mature, internalizing what is important to prior generations, there are two issues that I would like to address. The first issue is the tradition, is the story presented in a way that is engaging? Now, this is not a new question, and in this morning's Torah portion, there are moments where the notion of what children are going to ask is explored. In time to come, a child of yours will ask, "What does this mean?" And here is what you should say. Or, when your children ask, "Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem," what do you mean by this rite? What should you say? So we know that within the Torah and beyond the rabbinic interpretations, there was a huge effort to make the story about leaving Egypt be engaging. The Seder, which is based on the Greco-Roman Symposium, is nonetheless very Jewish. It is a talk feast. There is singing, and there are games. The rabbi said actually play games to keep the children awake, and there are all sorts of ways in which to tell the story. So it has to actually be engaging. Otherwise, children, even as they mature, are going to say, "This just doesn't work for me." But there's a second issue which requires even further conversation, and that is that especially as children grow up, they are going to ask questions based on their own moral sensibility. They are going to say, "Does this story make sense to me ethically? Are there questions that I have about the way our ancestors conducted themselves or about the way others conducted themselves?" And they are going to have a kind of awakening. I, as a teacher, see this happen all the time. I see students in my class start to ask questions. One of the major questions that is asked about the whole Exodus story has to do with what we refer to as collective punishment. The question is, why did the Egyptians have to suffer? And actually, last week, Benson mentioned that as well, so I'm glad that our students are wrestling with these important questions. And there is a moment in this morning's parashah that raises ethical questions among our commentators. So we know that the firstborn in the lands of Egypt were supposed to die from plague, and the Torah says that this was going to be b'bechor paro ha'yeshav kiso ad bechor hashivcha asher achar harechaim v'chol bechor behema. So the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, the firstborn of the enslaved women behind the millstone, so a huge socioeconomic gap, and also the firstborn of the cattle. So I ask you, what did the cattle do wrong? And there are various answers that are given. One about the Egyptians suggests that none of them spoke up, that they were all in some way complicit. But what I find more interesting than the answers is the fact that this was engaged. Because if you're going to tell children, absorb this story and make it your own, then you have to be prepared for their uncomfortable, at times, responses that have to do with their own ethical sensibility. And you can try to come up with answers, or you can suggest this or that, and that's fine. But just the conversation, just the willingness on the part of those in the prior generation to talk honestly with the emerging generation is extremely important, and we cannot shy away from that. And nowadays, of course, we can look around, and there are all kinds of situations that raise questions for all generations, but I'll address the emerging generation. So we are dealing with questions around immigration in this country, which I referred to last week. We are dealing with a repressive regime in Iran, which I spoke about last week. Very different circumstances, but an emerging generation is raising questions about what are the parameters, how do you respond, how do you ensure security without crossing certain other kinds of boundaries. These are important questions that need to be asked, and we should not say to those who are asking those questions, you have no right. We should be prepared as intelligent adults to have these kinds of conversations and to engage these questions because our ancestors always have. I want to encourage us, number one, to present our tradition in an engaging way, and number two, to present it in a deep way that doesn't shy away from the complexity. And the third thing I want to urge is that with all of that, it is okay to be able to say to the emerging generation, this is yours. This is your tradition. I am asking you to join this because it's already yours. And I want you to step up with your questions, even with your doubts, and become, as you mature, a thoughtful part of this story. When Pharaoh turns to Moses and says, Mi vami haholchim, who do you want to leave Egypt? Moses answers as follows, Bin arenu uvis kenenu nelech. Our young and our old are going to move forward together. It's one thing to say it, to set the stage. It's another thing to do it. And my hope is that if we are sufficiently engaging, if we are sufficiently thoughtful, if we are able to have the kinds of meaningful conversations that help an emerging generation understand that there is room for them at this table, then we will truly be able to walk forward together. Shabbat